Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. In alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa salatu wa salam ala ashraf al anbiya wa mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man tabawuhum bi ihsanin ila yawm ad-din wa ba'd. Saturday, once again, 3 p.m. or just a couple minutes after. We are here once again to read from the book Sayd al-Khawatir, Captured Thoughts, by the Hanbali jurists from about 9 centuries previous, Ibn al-Jawzi, rahmatullahi alayhi, may Allah shower him with mercy. We are up to chapter 28. As I had mentioned last week, this chapter is the wisdom and etiquette of marriage. And so this is a much longer chapter, a longer reminder. So this will probably take us a little bit of time, and we may have some additional excursions in terms of commentary or comment, if you will, as we go through the sections. So we will try to keep this down to a reasonable amount of time and break it up a little bit more so that things are a little more efficient time-wise. And inshallah, we'll take it from there. So, as I said, wisdom and etiquette of marriage. Ibn al-Jawzi, he starts off by saying that upon contemplating the benefits, meanings, and nature of marriage, nikah, I found out that the main reason for its existence is to bring forth offspring, because naturally the living constantly undergoes a process of decomposition from which a part transforms into nutrition while the rest comes to an end. And if I remember correctly, last week we had alluded to part of this idea before, which is, as it had indicated before, that Allah repeats frequently in the Quran, Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut, is that every soul will taste of death. All of us inevitably are headed towards the same outcome. At least in this worldly existence, we're headed towards the same outcome, that outcome being death. And as he alludes to here, is that the living go through a process of decomposition. From the minute we're born, we are given we're on a short fuse, if you will. Our time is ticking down to that inevitable moment when we will meet our death, which could come sooner or later, but it is inevitably coming at some point in time. Actually, Al-Ghazali had a comparison where he gave that it's as if we are standing in a line and walking across a plain in the dark, and in front of us there's a hole. We don't know where that hole is in terms of our proceeding forward. We continue walking in the dark until we inadvertently step into that hole, and that hole is our death. And we are proceeding in darkness, not realizing when we may take that final step and fall into the hole. The hole being the grave itself, and for our death. And so that we're all heading towards that point of death, at the point where everything will come to an end. Person transformed condition, and the rest comes to an end. He says, then, thus, should this worldly life be intended to last for a certain time, and such bodies are created mortal, then the feature of offspring was originated to replace the source, i.e., ensuring the continuity of human life. So in other words, the fact that we've been created with, if you will, an expiration date, that necessitates the replacement of that in order to continue life, to have succeeding generations, khulafa, if you will, generation after generation succeeding, which is one of the understandings or the interpretations when Allah says that I'm going to place upon the earth a khalifa, that this khalifa here is not, as we sometimes take it, a vicegerent, but that it is succeeding generations, generation after generation. And that is one of the ways that is rendered, and perhaps maybe more honest and a more accurate rendering, wallahu ta'ala alam. Ibn al-Jawzi continues, he says, however, since the process of sexual intercourse, this is where it gets interesting, if you will, since the process of sexual intercourse and intimacy requires and entails uncovering body parts and exposure to what a human despises per se, which are acts that honorable innate natures disdain. Allah implanted lust in people to encourage them to accept and embrace such acts, hence achieving the purpose of marriage. So here he's alluding to this idea that if we were purely spiritual beings, the idea of intimacy, of intimate sexual contact would repel us, would be repugnant to us. And even if you will, when you look at young children before they come of age and they start to come into the awareness and knowledge of the nature of men and women, the idea of, like, for instance, when you're growing up, uh, the idea of kissing is repellent to children. If you joke with them about kissing even their cousin or something like that, just in play, they'll recall me, ew, that's gross, because there's this innate quality or nature in human beings that they find these things repugnant to their nature when they're still in a more pristine state, in a more pristine quality. As they grow and as these feelings and these things are ignited within them, it becomes less so, because then the shahawat, they kick in and they start to induce within a person certain feelings towards these things that they may not have had before. And so this is where things get interesting, if you will. And it's through these desires, and we had spoken about this before, and I've covered this in other talks from Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin, when we talk about the battles with the shahawat, whether it's desires for food and drink or intimacy and things like that, etc. All of these things, the point that Ibn Qudama rahmatullahi alayhi made in Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin is that all of these things, although there are elements of them or degrees of them which are dispraised, in and of themselves are not evil, are not bad. They exist for a reason. And for instance, here he's talking about the shahwa, the desire for intimacy, for intimate contact between men and women in marriage, and that this desire is there for a wisdom, for a purpose, and that it does serve a need, and that the absence of it would be as much an injustice to society and creation as its overabundance is. And so we always have to mind it. This is another one of these subtle aspects of how the Deen of al-Islam is Deen al-Wasat. It's the moderate or middle way, the middle path, always taking a stance between two extremes. And so this is one of those elements that's important to understand about that. Without that, we would not be able to achieve the purposes of marriage and relations and building family units. And in fact, you look where these things have become perverted, that you see a decay in social order and even social growth. Some of you may be aware of some of these posts out there that talk about how, for instance, that Europe is going to become Islamized. I think it's like by 2050 or something like that, etc. The main proposal or the main thrust of their argument is that the birth rate amongst Muslims in Europe is, I forget what it is, 2 point something, 3 point something, something higher than the average for the rest of Europe, and that the European standard of the rest of Europe is like 1.1 or something like that, etc. And there's some statistic or some level at which that reproductive rates, if they fall below a certain point, you will not see a continuation, a growth or a maintenance of a population, and that general population of Europe is below that. And some of the arguments about why that is because of the abandonment of marriage from one standpoint, the other part being that the proliferation of homosexual relations and its promotion and its spread within society, and that this is undermining that. You find it less in the Muslim world, the Muslim societies, because of its emphasis on these values. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. So he continues, aside from the main purpose I also noticed another purpose. So aside from the purpose of procreation, he says, I notice another purpose that is found in performing sexual intercourses within marriage. The translator puts that in brackets to make sure it's clear. That is the discharging of the sperm from the male organ, which otherwise becomes harmful should it be congested within the body for a long time. Now, this next segment that he's going to go into, physicians may hear this and they may take issue with this. We have to realize that this is the prevailing thought from 900 years ago. This is somebody writing who's not necessarily a medical specialist. He is a religious scholar. It's not to say he's completely ignorant of these things, but it's to say that the information he has may be from a particular vantage point, if you will. So he continues along this line saying, this is because sperm is dispatched from the fourth stage of digestion. Thus, its essence is the most nutritious and best of quality. So I won't make too much commentary on this, because this is an older idea that may or may not bear any medical truth. Thus, it gathers and accumulates, for the body saves blood and semen as well as saliva, being one of the main pillars of the body to maintain its strength and survival, as if it fears its vanishing. So the idea being that through the process of digestion, through the process of eating and drinking, that these bodily fluids increase. As to the medical facts and realities around that, I can't comment on that, but what I can tell you is that from the standpoint of prophetic medicine, Tibbin Nabawi, that they do talk about how amongst the roots of spiritual diseases of desires and things like that is excessive eating and drinking. Is that those are one of the asbab, if you will, the means or the causes of excess in desires and the inability to control the desires, because it fuels those things. It's a fuel for shaitan. And even when you look in Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin, and we were talking over the issue around fasting and things like that, is that fasting is one of the most severe weapons one can use against shaitan, because it restricts that which gives him power. And so the restriction of food and drink is a means of curbing and bringing under control shaitan, as well as the shahawat, the influences, and as he alludes to later on in this section, the waswas that come about because of it. So that it's held in the body and it fears its fate. So whenever it accumulates, the sperm accumulates above normal levels, it will disturb the body in a similar way to what urine congestion does to the body. So in other words, when there's an excess of the accumulation of this fluid, that it creates an imbalance similar to the need we have to urinate when we have had too much to drink, and it builds up to the point that the overwhelming urge is to rid the body of that. So he's saying the same thing happens when it comes to sperm. So in the case of semen, its intangible negative effect is more disturbing than that of the tangible effect of urine congestion. So he's saying that that feeling of the buildup when it comes to sperm and the sexual impulse, the sexual pressure, is more disruptive to a person's nature than the buildup of urine and the need to release that. Since semen congestion, he says, leads to severe diseases affecting the function of the brain and can also be toxic. So again, this is the prevailing attitude about this during that time, whether there's any truth to the idea of repression, of release affecting the functions of the brain or being toxic in any way. Allah knows best regarding that. He continues, when a person enjoys healthy, salim, functional organs, the body will naturally urge the need for semen to be released whenever it accumulates, exactly as how one has the urge to urinate whenever urine accumulates in the body. So he says, if your body is functioning normally, you will have a natural response to that to rid the body of that disturbance, that pressure that's being imposed because of the accumulation. It says, however, since the healthiness, sahih, of people's sexual organs and desires differ from one person to another, In other words, some people may have less concentration, and so the urge for releasing will be lesser. So this uh, the level to which a person is affected by the accumulation or even the rate of accumulation varies from person to person. So some may have little to no desires and little to no issues regarding this, whereas others may have very active and very powerful desires that create those feelings much more readily. And so it varies. And so each person is on a different level, and one person's reality does not necessarily map equally to another person's reality. You have to be cognizant of that fact. So it should be noted that I am addressing those who have healthy sex organs when discussing the subject matter. That being said, as I have previously explained, when semen accumulates in the body, its congestion will cause diseases, amrad, and bring forth filthy ideas, afkar. These are these waswas, he alludes to it next in saying waswas. These are these thoughts that cross the mind when a person is feeling these sorts of things and their mind starts to drift, and thinking of ways to alleviate the disturbance, as well as entice heated passions, ishq, and insinuating whispers, waswasa. So all of these things, when the disturbance and the imbalance grows to the point that it becomes an imbalance within the person's body, within the person's self, all of these things start to kick in, these thoughts and these feelings and these whispers that all start to lead one towards different things depending on the healthiness of their personality and of their man and everything else. The direction that it takes them in could be one thing or another. And so this is where understanding these things help us to control it. So he continues, on the other hand, we may also find a person whose sex organs and desires are in a healthy state, yet still urges for more than he relieved himself, more though he relieved himself from semen. So he becomes like a person who eats yet never becomes replete. So in other words, he's talking about even though somebody might be otherwise healthy, the release of the sperm, of the semen, although it's completed, does not satiate him. He continues to have desire even after the physiological cause has been dealt with. And so this is something that he goes into a little bit of detail. He says, I've investigated the reasons for this condition and came to the conclusion that the problem in such a case lies with whom sexual intercourse is conducted. So he's saying part of the reason for this is not feeling satisfied, is what he begins to say is that part of it lies with whom sexual intercourse is conducted with. So in other words, the partner that's chosen. He says, whether it be unattractiveness, ugliness, physical defect, or even being undesired. So which causes only some of the semen to be released and not all of it. So in other words, not full satisfaction, not full achievement of the objective. So he said, if you want to verify the statistics, try to compare the quantity of semen you would release when it is in the place you desire and the quantity when you release it in a less desired place. For example, compare and see the difference between actual copulation and the process without penetration, and the difference between having sexual intercourse with a virgin and having sexual intercourse with a non-virgin woman. So he's drawing all these different analogies about that people hopefully can relate to, the idea of that, the two experiences, although similar on the outside, are not necessarily similar in their totality. And he gives another example here. So he continues, he says, this explains that selecting the right partner will ensure the release of all accumulated semen, and hence ultimate pleasure will be enjoyed accordingly. This issue may affect the quality of a person's offspring too. The children resulting from two young persons who save themselves from marriage is stronger than others, and most often, especially those who experience sexual intercourse frequently. So he's saying, in again, keep in mind when this is being written and the background of the one that's writing it, that the young men and women who save themselves from marriage and have their first experiences together, and are deeply attached, emotionally and physically and everything else, that their children are stronger than those who, are reckless with their affections, and do not save themselves, and you know do so more out of an animalistic passion versus a devotion. He'll get into some interesting points around that, which we may or may not get to today, because I don't want to drag this out too long. So he continues after that, saying, for this reason, it was disliked for relatives to marry each other. Now, even though we know from a Shari standpoint that the marriage of first cousins is permissible, it is, as he's saying here, it's not encouraged. He said, for this reason, it was disliked. So according to him here, he's saying it is makruh. It is disliked for relatives to marry each other because marrying a relative is less attractive to the self, as it gives the person the feeling he is interacting with a part of himself. Thus, marrying non-blood related women is encouraged and praised. So in other words, the more distant, or the more, as he'll allude to later, the more new something is, the more likely it is to entice interest and affections and even passions. So from this art of relationships, a person can ensure averting the harm of his surplus semen by marrying another one, even if the new one is unpleasant to the eye, as that may give results that are not achieved normally. The example of this is like a person who is eating bread and meat until no space is left in his stomach for another bite. If dessert, however, was served, he will eat from it, and if new items are presented, he will still eat from them too. So in other words, choosing wisely and picking somebody that will be satisfying in the sense of fulfilling this aspect of marriage, and not that it's the only aspect of marriage, but this is the one that he's focusing on right now, because it forms a bedrock. I mean, there's a parable or an analog that they have in the West, which is that pretty much any problem in a marriage often starts in the bedroom, and that there's you can see difficulties in the intimacy between spouses that will somehow bleed into other aspects of the relationship, and you will see them manifested there, where if they are able to deal with those things in their intimate lives, that it will improve things significantly. And so he gives the example of person who's eating, they eat, might be plain, plain food, or something like that. So it's nourishing, but it's not satisfying in the same sense. So they may be full, quote unquote, full from what they've eaten, but if they're offered dessert, they'll still partake of dessert. Or if they're offered something new, something enticing, they'll still take from that, because while the physical need for food may be satisfied, there's a deeper significance that hasn't been satiated, and so they'll still gravitate towards those things even still. And this is because the idea of desiring the new, he gets into it now, is eye-inspiring, where the self is not attracted to what it is used to, but rather seeks what it has not experienced, assuming a new joy will be gained from it. And if the self does not receive the pleasure it is after from the new object, it will search for it in another object, assuming that such pure pleasure exists elsewhere, and that it is something it imagines in every new object. So this idea of, this is a trap that we fall into. We get used to. There's a phrase in the West where they say familiarity breeds contempt. Is that you become too used to, too accustomed to things, and you begin to devalue them, begin to look down on them. And so he's alluding to something similar to this, to say that when you become used to something, it doesn't provide you the same satisfaction. And you start to look, another phrase is that the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. You keep thinking that the next thing is better, until you taste of that next thing, until you try out that next thing, and you realize the next thing is no better than the first thing. And so you're constantly looking for the next new thing. And this is, where people start to push the boundaries of things, and sometimes will get themselves in trouble because they keep thinking that the next new thing will give me what I'm looking for. When if it provides any satisfaction whatsoever, it's because of its novelty at the beginning, but it only lasts for a brief amount of time. And so it's this never-ending seeking. And he goes into an interesting point about this, which I think this is where we'll stop, and we'll save that point for tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. So this is going places where I wasn't expecting it to go, but we will get to some other interesting points as well that he touches upon. And inshallah, like I said, we may provide additional commentary and things like that as we go along where things seem relevant. Inshallah, this is have some benefit for you. If you have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to drop a line in the post, or you can message it to the outreach at irvingmasjid.org. And just as a final closing point for those who are watching until this point, if any of you made it this far, I do offer a service as an advisor for couples. I do have some training in various capacities, and I do utilize that to try and provide advice regarding couples issues and things like that, etc. So if you are interested in that, if you think that that might be something you would like to explore further, drop a line to outreach@irvingmasjid.org. Make it attention to Imam Saeed, and I will try and get back to you at my convenience. And inshallah, until tomorrow, jazakum Allahu khair. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.